Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Civ Stories. I am your host, Kyle, and I will be taking you through stories of miracles, military brilliance, and pure craziness within the Civilization game universe. If you'd like to submit your own stories for me to read and discuss, feel free to email them at storiesofciv@gmail.com. I hope whoever's using Civ Stories as their Gmail handle is making good use of it, because unfortunately I am not. I digress. I figured for the first episode, I would first introduce my relationship with the Civilization series. I've been an avid watcher of Civ YouTube content since Civ 5 came out in 2010. I played the game for roughly 5 years and is the one I'm most familiar with. I'm still terrible at it, but I play to create a history of my own world, filled with epics and tragedies alike. That is what I really get out of a game of Civilization. It isn't about mastering the meta for me, but rather creating a universe in which I am a participant in and an observer in the Anthropocene. That is enough about me personally. On to the story for today. This first story comes from one of my early games of Civ. With very little knowledge of the bonuses of each civilization, I chose Japan at random. I decided to select one of the world maps, and to my surprise, I was placed in Japan. The beginning of the game was rather slow. I conquered the Japanese mainland with no resistance and began to make a foothold in eastern mainland China. However, the focus of today's story comes when I began producing triremes. For those who don't know, triremes are the first naval unit you get in the game and allow you to explore the wider world only accessible by ocean. These small wooden vessels propelled by sail would be the key to the expansion of the bustling Japanese Empire. My goal was to explore and conquer what we know as the Western United States, as well as Latin and South America. My triremes were able to make this journey to America through the shallow passage that lies between northern Russia and Alaska. However, the quest of exploration was cut short due to the maritime border of a lone city-state named Almaty. Almaty was located on the coast of central California. Its borders stretched well into the deep ocean, which my triremes were unable to navigate in. I stopped and thought about my options. I could wait a few turns and get my archers stationed in Kyoto to embark into these foreign lands and lay siege to the city in conjunction with the navy, or I could be diplomatic. There was much back and forth about these options. I had the capabilities to take over Almaty, but I also had a surplus of money that wasn't being used. The latter was chosen, and the government of Almaty was paid off. The triremes continued on, exploring without much thought of the interaction. They eventually made their way around South America and up the eastern seaboard before returning home from their journey. After that, I thought my next interaction with the Americas would be a full frontal invasion, conquering everything in my path, Almaty included. That's what I planned for. Triremes, caravels, archers, knights, everything I could ever need to conquer 2 continents. But something was changing beyond my gaze. The winds of war were ravaging the interior. You see, the civilization of Babylon was tearing up everything in its path. They were located in the southern United States and went as far down as southern Mexico. Their war machine was rapidly approaching the Pacific Northwest. My forgotten ally, Almaty, stood surrounded with their backs to the Pacific Ocean. It was then that my plans changed drastically. Babylon declared war on Almaty and was closing in with an invasion force. A nervous pang filled my chest as my ally was left hopelessly to defend itself. A few scraps of soldiers left to defend the exterior of the city were no match for the experienced and greater numbered Babylonian army. Their archers and catapults rained incessantly down upon the city. The swift cavalry pierced through the feeble ranks of spearmen. It was never a fair match. Beyond the ranks of the soldiers were Babylonian missionaries coming to convert Almaty. Like vultures, they waited for their prey to be finished off. It was an abysmal affair and quite upsetting to be a bystander of. I was playing as a rather retributive player and saw this as an attack on an extension of Japan. However, all of my army was stationed on the Japanese mainland or coast except for 1 or 2 caravels and a galleass, so there wasn't much I could do at the beginning except damage a few units as they swarmed on the city. Miraculously, Babylon committed a fatal error that bought us the time that we needed. Babylon had no melee units that were able to get to the front line of the siege. Melee units are the only units that are able to conquer cities, so I mustered up my forces and headed for the west coast. The first few sequences of the landing stage were difficult. My ships that were able to make an attack on land units had to wither away enough of them for my land army to make an indent and push back the Babylonians. I began to form an offensive line of ranged ships all along the west coast. They bombarded the Babylonians every chance they could. While this was happening, I had to be careful with my land units as they were incredibly vulnerable to being destroyed in open water. They'd slip past my armada and create a beachhead as friendly and enemy fire flew all around them. My swordsmen and a few samurai were the first Japanese soldiers to touch the western coast of North America. Back to the coast, they began to form up on California beaches. They bravely advanced one tile deep into foreign lands where waves of Babylonians were waiting. They needed to fan out into the interior so my archers could provide more range support. I knew my chances of being successful in repelling the Babylonians would hang in how quickly my ranged units could get disembarked. My melee units would surely be destroyed under the immense focused fire of the Babylonians if I didn't have my own artillery to return fire. The swordsmen and samurai, with the aid of the galleasses, were able to make an indent 3 or so tiles deep, supporting the flanks of Almaty. This allowed for the archers to make a beachhead and help from the back to advance the line. This additional firepower was crucial in driving back the Babylonians. Whatever scraps of the spearmen that Almaty had left stood firmly alongside their Japanese counterparts. The swordsmen and samurai near death began to turn around in battle as the arrows from their own side flew overhead for a change. The blazing west coast sun overhead and an enemy staring them down, they advanced into the unknown. My army, emboldened, pushed into the interior, sweeping into what we know as Nevada and Utah. I had nowhere near the army or the current intentions to take over Babylonian cities, so our forces clashed in the barren deserts of southwestern North America. The fighting raged on for many turns, each side taking and giving territories in a dance-like fashion. However, with the combined efforts of my army and the navy, the Japanese soldiers were swiftly able to flank to the east of the Babylonians and drive them back into their Latin American homeland. I eventually defeated the Babylonians enough that they were willing to broker a peace deal with the Japanese and Almaty. Believing that they would leave Almaty alone, I sent the majority of my troops back home to shore up defenses against the looming threats out of Western Europe. However, I was incredibly naive to believe this. The Babylonians attempted to invade Almaty not just once, but twice afterwards. The sequence of events were practically identical, but the third invasion I advanced to the point of battleships, infantry, and artillery, and decided to wipe out Babylon out of North America for good. And there we have it, the first episode of Sif Stories. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, I would appreciate it if you shared this podcast with those who you think might enjoy it as well. Like I stated in the beginning, if you have your own stories from Civilization that you'd like me to read, feel free to email them to storiesofciv@gmail.com. And that's all from me. Remember, keep telling stories. Hello. It wasn't actually all from me. This is a post-editing note. I realized that my episode is roughly 8 minutes and 30 seconds, and if you're like me, I prefer having podcasts being longer. However, this first script, I didn't realize it would be so short, and I wanted to get it out just so I could start making more episodes. And so for the future, I plan to have more discussive episodes with friends and people I played Civ with, so we can have longer episodes while also keeping the story format and being entertaining. If that's something you'd be interested in, please let me know. Or if you'd prefer for me to have like a more scripted episode, let me know and I can maybe juggle between the two. I'm just still trying to figure this out, and yeah. All right, now it is all from me. So farewell.